So Bala, today what we're going to discuss is about a service called Azure Migrate. Okay. Now, one of the important stuff when you're working in Azure is challenging as well as migration. Okay. Now, when we say migration, migration involves a lot of things. Okay. So migration involves migrating your resources from, let's say, on-premises physical servers to Azure, or it could be migrating your Hyper-V virtual machines to Azure, or it could be migrating your VMware virtual machines to Azure, or it could be migrating your GCP or AWS virtual machines to Azure. Okay. So when we say migration, in the earlier days of Azure, there was a tool or there was a service called Azure Site Recovery, which we were using for migrating all these workloads. And I'm not saying that the service has been disappeared. The service is still there, which is Azure Site Recovery, but now that's being used for a different purpose altogether. Okay, so today we are going to discuss about a new service, or I would say refurbished or refined service called Azure Migrate. Okay, and we will also compare this service with the Azure Site Recovery. Okay, so but if you can mute yourself, then that will be good. Okay, so today the service that we will be discussing is called as Azure Migrate. Now, what exactly this service is all about? Azure Migrate was a service which is in Azure from the initial days. Okay, so it's not that Azure Migrate is new in the Azure stack. So it's been there from almost very, I would say, 4 5 years. And now, what Microsoft has done is Microsoft has made a lot of changes in the service. Azure Migrate was service which we were using it for doing an assessment of workloads before we actually migrate them. Now, when we say assessment, assessment is like uh, doing a checks whether we can really migrate the service to Azure. So I would give you an example here. Let's say you want to purchase a bike. Okay. So what basically you do is you don't go and simply buy any random bike. You would do your research. You would visit different showrooms. You would do different research on internet around different bikes that are available, and then you would also look for your priorities, that what are the bikes that you are comfortable with, what are the cost, and can you really afford that bike after you own it. So there are a lot of things that involves in an assessment. And when you're dealing with a very large infrastructure like 1,000, 2,000, 5,000, 5,000, 10,000 servers, it's very important to perform an assessment before we actually migrate it to cloud, because we cannot simply give any reasons after migrating when the cost would go high that no, we haven't checked about the cost and we just did the migration. So it's very important that you do due diligence, you do an assessment which will help us understand, or which will help management understand that if we migrate so and so infrastructure from on-prem to Azure, this is the cost that I will incur, and this is the savings that I'll get as compared to on-premises. And for that reason, we were using this service called Azure Migrate in the past. But now, what Microsoft has done is Microsoft has did a lot of changes in the Azure Migrate service itself, and now we can use Azure Migrate service for doing an assessment, as well as you can use the same Azure Migrate service to perform the migration as well. Okay, so things have changed a lot now, and now you don't have to really do use a combination of Azure Migrate to perform assessment and then use Azure Site Recovery for doing migration. Now, Azure Migrate is your central hub for performing your assessments and performing your migrations. So you don't have to go for any other service to do assessment and migrations. Any questions so far, Bala?
No, sir. Sir, we have Azure Migrate V1 and V2, right? So,
Yes, yes. So the service that we are talking about now is Azure Migrate version 2.0. The Azure Migrate version 1.0 was only consist of assessment, and we were not able to use the Azure Migrate 1.0 for migration. So this is a service which Azure Migrate 2.0 is a service that we will be using it for performing an assessment as well as migration.
So it will work for generation to virtual machine, sir. So
Uh,
migration to
yes.
okay.
All right. So let's move on now. So the first step before we start using Azure Migrate is to create an Azure Migrate project. Okay. And the way you create an Azure Migrate project is to go to your portal menu and click on Azure Migrate Service. If you don't find Azure Migrate Service here, you can always go to All Services and find, or you can always type in the search, and you can go to your Azure Migrate Service. Okay, so here you go, Azure Migrate. So when you land up in Azure Migrate, the first thing is to create a project. Okay, now I'll walk you through how you can create a project. In the getting started itself, you'll see that there is an option to assess and migrate in servers. Okay, but assessing and migrating servers requires a project to be created first. So you will have to click on assess and migrate servers, and then what would happen is it would redirect me to my default project. So this is the project which I have created yesterday for demonstrating it to my batch. So you can see here, this is the project name, Hyper-V migration. But if you have to create a new project, the way you can create is you can click on change, and when you are in the change, here you will have a link called click here to create a new project. So I can click here, and then what we will do is we'll create a new project, and that would need a resource group. Okay, so I'll type in let's say Sunday Bala project. Okay, so this is the project that we're creating. Now, it is also important that you choose your geography. Now, what is geography? Basically, this will help you choose a project which is near to your migration project. So for an example, you're planning to migrate VMware virtual machines from your on-prem, and those VMware virtual machines are residing, let's say, in somewhere in US. Okay, so it's illogical to create a project somewhere in Europe or some other geography other than US. So it is important that you choose geography very wisely, though it does not have much impact on the performance and so on. So uh, let's create this project in somewhere in the United States geography. So I selected United States. Now, if you click on next, you'll be asked to select an assessment tool. Now, as I said earlier, that Azure Migrate was used as an assessment tool in the earlier days, but now uh, with a lot of changes in the Azure Migrate service, what Microsoft has done is Microsoft has included their Azure Migrate Server Assessment tool, but along with their own Azure Migrate Server Assessment tool, they have also included the third party providers as well. And these third party providers are called as ISVs. Now, what is ISV? ISV stands for Independent Software Vendor. So now you can choose any third party vendor for performing your assessment if you are not comfortable with the Azure Migrate server assessment tool. Okay, but for today's demonstration, I will go with the Azure Migrate server assessment tool. And here you have a lot of details about the Azure Migrate server assessment tool on what it can do and what are the supported features. So if you go with the Azure Migrate server assessment tool, that can help you with the VMware and Hyper-V virtual machines assessment. It can help you in the physical machines assessment, and it can do an import-based assessment. So you can okay, and import-based assessments are still in preview. And what are the features? The features are it can do an agentless discovery. Now, one of the important part when you're doing a discovery of a very large infrastructure, it is not possible to go and install agent on each and every machine so that the machine can send data to your centralized server. But the Azure Migrate server assessment tool is based on an agentless discovery. So let's say you want to perform an discovery of 1,000 virtual machines in a VMware environment. So you don't have to go and install any sort of agent on those 1,000 virtual machines. What you could do is You just have to install a small collector on your vCenter server, and that would do an discovery of entire 1,000 machines for you without any agents installed on any single machine. Then it can help you do a cost planning and optimal right sizing and discovery of installed applications, which is in preview, application dependency analysis, and cloud migration planning. So we are just talking about an assessment tool at the moment. So this particular tool will be able to help us to do a lot of things. So I'll go with the Azure Migrate Server Assessment. Click on Next. Now, in this next step, it is now asking us, after you perform an assessment, what is the migration tool that you're planning to use? Okay. So here also you can see there are three different ISVs, Carbonite, Corantech, and Rackware. But apart from these three ISV, Microsoft has their own Azure migration tool as well. So as I said earlier, that with Azure Migrate version 2.0, Azure Migrate now also supports migration. So you can use this Azure Migrate as a migration tool as well. So I'll click Azure Migrate Server Migration, click on Next, and then I will click on Add Tools. There could be a possibility that if you just want to perform an assessment and not migration, you can always skip this test. You can see here, you can skip adding a migration tool for now. So you can skip this and you can create a project. But for now, I'll be creating this with the migration tool as well. So click on Add Tools, and this will start creating an Azure Migrate project for me. So in order to set up an infrastructure for migration, what we are planning to do is I've documented something in my Word document that what are the things that we will need for an Azure Migrate lab. So we will need a virtual machine in Azure uh, created with a D4S underscore V3 SKU, which will have 4 CPUs and 16 GB RAM. We will use premium SSDs for that virtual machine for higher performance. Okay. And once this VM is created, we will install a Hyper-V role on top of that virtual machine. So let's go ahead and create a virtual machine. So I'll open a duplicate tab so that we can work with two different tabs at one time. So I'll go to my virtual machines and then I'll click on Add. And I'll give some meaningful name to this virtual machine. Let me first select my resource group. What was my resource group name? So here's the resource group, RG-AC migrate. And I will name this virtual machine as Hyper-V. Give this as Hyper-V host. Okay. And then I would like to create this virtual machine in East2S2. The image that I'll be using is, let's go with the Server 2016 data center. I don't want any spot instances, but the size would be D4SV3. So let's select D4SV3. I'll remove this filter. And here is the size, D4SV3, which will give us 4-core processor and 16 GB RAM. I'll select this. Let's enter the local username and password. All right. Let's allow some ports. So I'll use RDP port next. And here we'll go with the premium SSD. And what I'm doing is to store the virtual machine files. I will create a new disk called as Hyper-V virtual machine disks, and let it be 1 TB. Let's click on OK. Next, I'll select my virtual network. I'll select my subnet. So select a new subnet here. I would need an public IP address so that I can access this virtual machine. For now, I don't want any rules to be created for my NIC. Let's keep this accelerated networking on. Click on next. I don't want any boot diagnostics. So let's click on next. Tags, review and create. And once this is done, I will click on create so that this virtual machine will start getting deployed. Bala, you there?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yeah.
There seems to be some problem with the portal. Let me refresh the portal and create the virtual machine once again. Click on add, select the resource group, rg hyphen AC migrate, say hyper v host in the East US2, Windows Server 2016, and the size would be T4SV3. Select. Password. Next, premium SSD, attach a new disk. Let it be 1 TB. Next, VNet, my subnet. I don't want any NIC security group. Next, don't want any boot diagnostic to be enabled. No auto shutdown. Next. So Bala, we will be installing an Hyper-V role on this virtual machine. So if required, I could make use of this extension to install Hyper-V, but I won't be doing that at the moment. We will do that later once the VM is created. So I'll go with next,
Okay.
review and create, and then I'll click on create. This will start creating a virtual machine for me. But I just give me a moment, okay? I'll be back.
Okay, sir. Yes, sir.
All right. So
Yes.
the deployment is complete, Bala. It was very quick. Uh, and let's go to the resource and access this resource. So I'll copy this and I'll take an RDP. So once we access this virtual machine, the next step that we have to do is, so we created a virtual machine. We used an premium SSD for our hard drive. Now the next thing is to install an Hyper-V role. Okay, so we'll install an Hyper-V role quickly, and then we'll have to configure the virtual switch for the Hyper-V for the communication of our Hyper-V VMs. Okay, have you worked with Hyper-V before?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and we will also need an ISO image of server 2012, any server OS, which is 2012 R2 onwards. So what we'll do is we'll first we'll start downloading the ISO image from the Microsoft website, and then we'll start configuring the Hyper-V and the vSwitch, so that meanwhile we are configuring the Hyper-V, our ISO would be downloaded.
Sir, one question actually.
Yes, tell me.
Yeah. For Azure site recovery, we used to configure one Hyper-V server as a that is a minimum 8 GB RAM and 1 TB additional disk as a configuration server. So we will download
That's
the
right.
setup while preparing the infrastructure. We will download the setup and we will install the setup into the configuration server. Though that particular configuration server will communicate between on-premises virtual machines, who is exactly replicating to Azure, as well as Azure Site Recovery Vault. So that Azure Site Recovery. So now we do not have any configuration server, right?
No, so when you're talking about Azure Site Recovery, yes. So yeah, in the earlier days, we used to configure something called configuration server, which also had a role called process server and master target server. Okay, but that was in terms of migrating your physical servers. Okay, so if you have a use case of migrating physical servers, then only we used to require that. But while using Azure Site Recovery, if you have to migrate Hyper-V virtual machines or VMware virtual machines, you didn't require this appliance, what we call as a configuration server. And today also, even with Azure Migrate service, you still need a configuration server to migrate the data from on-prem to Azure. So you still need that configuration server, but that is only when you want to migrate physical servers, not the Hyper-V virtual machines or VMware virtual machines.
So voice is breaking. Actually, I'm unable to.
Sorry,
Hello. Yeah, I'm able to hear, sir. Voice is breaking actually. Yes, sir. Can you
some
explain me, sir?
problem with my internet, I believe. Now you're able to hear
Can
me?
you? Yes, yes, yes. Can you explain once again, sir? That same point.
Yeah. So what I was saying is, uh, configuration server is still required today also, and the purpose of configuration server in the early days and today is to migrate physical server. So when you have a workload called physical server, you still need a configuration server. But in case of migrating your Hyper-V virtual machines and VMware virtual machines, you don't really need that.
Yes, sir. Yeah, got it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So so this is my Hyper-V host. If you see the details, let's go to the command prompt and let me show you. So this is the Hyper-V host that we created on Azure. Okay. Now the first thing that I'll do is I'll go to Server Manager and turn off the IE Enhanced Security. So if we go to this IE Enhanced Security configuration, I'll turn off this because with I enhanced security configuration, it gives us a lot of pop-ups when accessing websites, and it blocks a lot of things like it blocks file download and so on. So when you turn off, you can get rid of those things. So what I can do now is I'll go to google.com and download the ISO required for our configuration. Okay, so I'll go to google.com and then I'll download Windows Server 2012 R2 ISO. And here you will find a link for the Windows Server 2012 R2 Evolution Edition. And while downloading, it will ask you to enter certain information. So when you're here, so you can see Windows Server 2012 R2, and I would select an ISO image and click on continue. It will ask me for certain information. So I'll enter my name, company name, company size, job title, I'd say, and system administrator architect, work email address, and phone number, and then country India. Okay, and I don't want this information. Click on continue. Let's first select the language, English, the architecture, click on download. And there you go. So this is around 4.22 GB and it will take some time. Meanwhile, what we can do is we can go ahead and install an Hyper-V role. So I'll go to Server Manager and then I'll click on Add Roles and Features. Click on Next, 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 and then select the Hyper-V role. Select the Hyper-V role. Go with the defaults. So it will ask you to create a virtual switch, but will not create while we are installing the role. I'll show you a different process of creating the virtual switch and configuring it later on. So we'll leave the defaults. And there you go. So here it is asking us a location to store the virtual hard drive files and the virtual machine configuration files. If you remember, we have added an 1 TB additional disk for this purpose. So let's go to a file explorer to see if we can see that 1 TB volume. So I'll go to file explorer. Okay. And we'll have to initialize it first before we start using it. So I'll go to disk management. Okay, let's initialize the disk. Then I create a simple volume. Next, 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 finish. Okay, the volume is created. I'll create a new folder here called virtual machines. Virtual machines, and we'll store all the virtual hard drives and the configuration files in this folder. So I'll close all of this. And here, browse it, go to the spacey volume, and we'll have this virtual machine folder. We'll copy the same thing in the default location for VM files. Next, and then let's click on and let's check mark this, click on install. So this will take some time. Meanwhile, let's go ahead and check if the file has been downloaded, the ISO image. And yes, it says the file has been downloaded. Now, what we have to do is once the Hyper-V role is installed, we will have to create a virtual switch. Okay. Now, let me tell you what is this virtual switch. And this concept is in Hyper-V as well as VMware as well. So a virtual switch is basically a switch which helps the Hyper-V virtual machines that we create in Hyper-V to communicate with the Hyper-V host uh, as well as the servers which are present in our internal network. Okay, and there are three types of Hyper-V switch: internal switch, external switch, and public switch. So you can read about the virtual switches of Hyper-V on the Microsoft documentation. So the first thing that we will create is we'll create a virtual switch. Second thing is we'll configure that virtual switch network adapter. Okay. And third thing is we will configure some NAT rules. So I already have some PowerShell lines configured for this. And if you see, the first command is to create a virtual switch. And though all of this stuff can be done from the graphical user interface as well. So it's not necessary that if you don't know PowerShell, that's fine. You can also do it from the graphical interface. So the first command is new hyphen VM switch is to create a new Hyper-V virtual switch, wherein you have to provide a switch name and the switch type, what type of switch you want to create. Once the switch is created, then we have to assign an IP address to the switch that we have created. So new hyphen net IP address, hyphen IP address, the IP address that we want to assign to our switch, the prefix length, the interface alias. So on what switch you want to assign this IP address. And this is to configure the NAT rule. Okay, so we'll wait for our infrastructure to be ready. So once this Hyper-V role is installed, I believe it will take and reboot. And once the reboot is done, we'll go ahead and configure this virtual switch. Any questions so far, Bala?
One question. We have gave that location to VHD files, right, sir?
Sorry,
So D drive location.
E drive. We have given an E drive or F drive,
Okay,
I believe.
for okay, we are for only VHD location.
VHD as well as the virtual machine configuration files.
Okay, both location we have changed to E drive, F
Yes,
drive.
F F drive. Yes.
Okay, yeah, right.
Can you mute yourself? Farah? And one more point to note here, Bala, is whenever you are installing Hyper-V on any Azure virtual machine, make sure that you are on a SKU which is supported for Hyper-V, because Hyper-V falls under a nested virtualization, and nested virtualization is not supported by Azure with every virtual machine SKU. So there are specific SKUs on which you can install Hyper-V and not all. So any virtual machine SKU wherein you find V3 supports Hyper-V. So what I'm saying is, if we go to size, so you see a lot of sizes here. So these sizes are not supported with Hyper-V. But if you see any virtual machine size which has underscore V3 are the sizes which are supported for the nested virtualization. So you could see here you have V3 in the D series, you'll find V3 in the E series. So even though even this series are also not supported for Hyper-V. So if I clear this, and if we go to E series, so this E series in E series also we have V3, and these are the series which also supports the nested virtualization. So you have to make sure that you're on the right virtual machine size. And the reason why we choose this, where is the size, D4SV3, is of the same reason that we should be able to install Hyper-V, and that's why we went for the V3 series.
Thank you, sir. Sure.